a group of conservationists and other interested bodies sort of came up with the term nature positive about 5 years ago, with the definition that they hoped there would be a global goal to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030 compared to a 2020 baseline, and then achieve full nature recovery, whatever exactly that means, by 2050. The Labor government in Australia adopted the term, but not the definition. They didn't set a baseline on how we would measure the recovery, what year the recovery would be measured against. But Tanya Plibersek, the minister, very early on went to the biodiversity COP and said, Australia will hold this nature positive summit. It'll be the first of its kind. We'll get people to come from all over the world. Nature positive is the way forward. Look, I got to be perfectly honest. While a lot of people with good intentions came and spoke at that summit in October, and you and I were both there, I don't think anything concrete came from it. I don't think there was any concrete agreement about the way forward. And I don't know that there's been any suggestion of where it goes from here in terms of another country hosting a summit on a similar line to push that agenda.
Welcome to the Mongabay newscast. I'm your co-host, Mike DiGirolamo, bringing you weekly conversations with experts, authors, scientists, and activists working on the front lines of conservation, shining a light on some of the most pressing issues facing our planet and holding people in power to account. This podcast is edited on Gadigal land. Today on the newscast, I speak with Adam Morton, the environment editor at The Guardian, Australia. He joins me to talk about the state of environmental protection in the country. Australia has the highest mammalian extinction rate of any nation in the world and is often considered the only wealthy industrialized country that is also a global deforestation hotspot. Now, Australia's current government campaigned on reforming the nation's outdated environmental laws, but Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has all but scuttled these key reforms ahead of the next federal election, which will occur before May. A note of correction here. Adam and I spoke with each other and recorded this audio the week before Monday, March 24th, 2025, when the Labour Party announced that if they win a second term in the federal election, they will then establish an EPA. It should be noted, however, that their initial commitment to make an EPA was a campaign promise made in 2022. Morton talks to me about these broken promises and how they might influence nations abroad. Two factors in the equation include the concept of nature-positive laws. It's a confusing term, but one that looks to halt biodiversity loss against a baseline and encourage other countries to follow suit. Australia was the first nation to host a nature-positive summit last year, largely pitching itself as a leader in adopting this agenda. But its own tepid embrace of the concept makes subsequent gatherings in other countries look uncertain. Lastly, the nation's iconic and globally beloved marsupial, the koala, is at the mercy of logging practices impacting lands slated to be used for a koala national park. All of these developments, Adam says, are worrying for Australians and for those that look to the nation. However, a silver lining to the situation may be manifesting in the increasing popularity of independent and more environmentally conscious candidates that are outside of the government's two major parties. So, Adam, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Mongabay newscast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
First, before we get into it, could you give our listeners a context of what's happening in Australia at the moment in regards to nature protection legislation in this term of Parliament, and why is it so remarkable?
That's a big question. So this term of Parliament has seen the return of a Labor government in Australia after nearly a decade in the wilderness, and I think we can't talk about it without referencing that, because the nearly 10 years under the Liberal National Conservative coalition, I think most independent observers would say led to a significant backward step in nature protection, both in terms of funding, in terms of resources for environmental bureaucracy. There was a real red tape, green tape, cutting program that removed a lot of expertise from government in that process. And we had, during that time, a raft of evidence that the health of Australian nature was in significant decline. Labor came into power with a fairly minimal platform to address that, to be honest. They said they would introduce a National Environment Protection Agency, which the country currently doesn't have. And there was sort of a notional idea that they might look to address national environment laws, which have been, to be honest, broadly criticised by everybody involved, conservationists and industry, as not up to the job of what they need. But then quickly after Labor came into power, the new Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek, who didn't have a background in that portfolio before the party was elected to government, set out a fairly ambitious agenda to rewrite national laws, create an EPA, and use very strong language in a major speech early in the term that she was going to turn around 10 years of neglect under the previous government and that the environment was back on the priority list under the new government. So that's sort of the backdrop. And then since then, it's been a real battle, both for the government and within the government, about what it was going to do and where it would land. The short version is that they ultimately broke their commitments up into 3 stages to try to address the failures in nature protection, and only delivered on stage 1. And stage 1 was a fairly minor change without the others. It was to introduce a framework for what they called nature positive laws that was really to encourage private investment in nature protection. That hasn't led to a significant change at this point. And then there was a commitment to introduce laws to create an EPA and a second body, Environment Information Australia. We have very little information about environmental health across the country. Again, everybody agrees that needs to be addressed. So that was part of the second stage. That got very close to a deal in federal parliament that may have seen that passed. And then the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, under significant pressure from one of the state Labor governments in Western Australia, where there's a really strong resources and mining sector, put significant pressure on him to not do that. And he intervened and scuppered that deal. And so that has been pushed off. And then the third stage, which is to rewrite the laws that everybody's agrees is failing, has also been pushed off on the never. It notionally remains a Labor commitment, but we're going into an election shortly. And at this stage, exactly what sort of commitment Labor will take to the election and what might happen beyond the next election is an open question.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to listen to the first few minutes of this podcast. There is much more to the conversation, but if you want to hear the full interview, find the Mongabay newscast wherever you get your podcasts from and click subscribe. You can also get each new episode straight to your email inbox by subscribing to Mongabay's weekly newsletter at mongabay.com. And if you really want to support us, you can donate to us at patreon.com/Mongabay. Don't forget to leave a review, and thank you as always for listening.